Good morning. We're going to take turns, I think, coming on and off stage, so bear with us as we go through that navigation. Looks like this is straightforward. So Jeff Schroeder, yeah, I can give myself a little bit of an intro as well, Hodan. But yeah, the plan is navigating the pathway for decarbonization for our presentation this morning. Really quickly, looks like a lot of slides. It's not that bad. But the overarching plan is speaking a little bit about the business case, how you go about in the design process, looking at some of the challenges and how to overcome those challenges, and then speaking about some of the financial opportunities, the grants, similar to what we just heard about, and some of the success stories that we have within Stantec. There are pretty faces again for Gina and myself. Really quickly, a little bit about Stantec. So we are a design company. We don't do construction, we don't manufacture products. It's purely design, engineering, architecture, etc. We've been very excited and happy to speak to that we are ranked #1 within our industry peer group for the consulting work that we do. A lot of that speaks to both how Stantec operates as a company, but also the projects that we work on. So the quantity of projects that we design and work on for our clients that have environmental or sustainability drivers. And then just a little bit about the values that we have within Stantec. So we are nothing without our people. We are a design company, so our people are very important to us. Together, so as a large corporation, we are a global company. The expertise that we have from around the world is very important, that we can bring that correct expertise to the projects wherever they may be, and I'll speak about that in a bit. We do what is right, so ethics, etc., and we are driven to achieve. And then just in regards to the strategy and synergy of design in decarbonization, the image looks a little bit washed out here on the screen, but it really speaks to a vast amount of technologies that are available to be used to support decarbonization within the built environment. A number of different market drivers that might lead to the decision to decarbonize. A variety of clients have a variety of different outlooks on that, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of work to be done. It really takes the collective good of all of us in this room to make this happen. And so I'm excited to share the lessons that we've learned and the processes that we go through to help move the industry forward as best as possible. Okay, Gina.
Hi, everyone. Perfect. So I'll quickly introduce myself as well. I work closely with Hodan and a group of subject matter expertise here in Ottawa. I like to call our team as a center of excellence because, believe it or not, we're able to work on projects that are global within the Middle East and in the US and in Canada, and that's really interesting. Throughout the day, we get to speak to stakeholders and clients with various backgrounds. And this is really important because when you want to try to communicate decarbonization requirements to a group of stakeholders that believe it's really immediate or maybe less immediate, it's really important to be aware of how to tackle that, whether through analysis, whether through assessments, but the right language and the right backup services need to be really communicated closely and early on. We do have this slide up here, and I really don't need to communicate the importance of the climate crisis that we're seeing globally. Whether it's the high peak temperatures, whether it's the sea level rise, whether it's the heat waves, the fires that we've already started to experience here in Canada. But most importantly, I would like to say that how is that really relating to the efforts that we're putting in? So on each slide, I'll try to relate to a specific project and how we're going about it. So one of the large-scale projects we're working on in Saudi Arabia today, the first thing that we wanted to ensure with a temperature peak that goes up to 50 degrees Celsius is that are we designing right today for the next 10, 20 years? So one thing that comes to our mind is really making sure of future resiliency. So we've integrated future weather files, and we're modeling based on future temperatures and future humidity targets that vary throughout the year, and that's really important. And what about the urgency? So, as Hodam mentioned, over the past decade, we've filled the missing piece of the puzzle, which is the operational energy. We've been able to list a large list of energy conservation measures, test them, communicate them, integrate technologies, working closely with the market maturity, understanding what's available in the market, what is local, what's global. But what about embodied carbon? So 5 years back, I joined 2 technical committees that write decarbonization guidelines for ASHRAE. And those 2 guidelines will be available in the next 2 months and free to download from the website. And what those speak about is basically methodologies and frameworks, because we all understand this language is new, and especially to our clients. One of the client calls we had yesterday, and Hodan was on the call, was basically communicating to a new hospital in New York that has a specific new mandate, Executive Order 22. And that was mandated, but then the client and the team were only aware 1 week back. So we had to communicate the requirements. We had to understand how this could be integrated because the project design is progressing. So one of the important things here is the communication. And how can we clearly, concisely list what needs to be done and making the language as doable and implementable as possible. And believe it or not, sometimes if you're actually having a project that is targeting a LEED Gold certification, sometimes by just targeting a credit under that framework actually complies with the whole executive order requirement and reporting. So the more this language, and communication and training is integrated with these discussions, the better this is implemented. One more thing about the embodied carbon, and we have a dedicated slide on that, that when we talk about the extraction, manufacturing, transportation of that, we're design engineers. We do the modeling and assessment, but that doesn't mean we don't need to connect with manufacturers, with developers, and with the construction sector. We really need to come all together and to understand what works best and understand where's the impact and how it could be reduced. The most astonishing fact that comes to my mind is that embodied carbon impact is really the highest before actually us occupying the building. So you construct the building, before you're occupying it, you've already spent your budget on the embodied carbon. So all these decisions, as they are made, they need to really be made wisely early on. UN SDG goals, you probably see this interesting, colorful slide, but indeed, on every single project, what we do is that we look at the minimum code requirements, we look at the UN SDG goals. Are we able to meet all 17? Not quite, but we're able to clarify a couple of core SDGs that relate a lot to the specific project that we're working on. Is it in the middle of the desert? Is it in the Arctic? Is it in an industrial where high-rise buildings are more dominant? We pick those core SDGs and we carry on efforts and celebrate efficiencies that meet these core SDGs. We also, beyond the minimum code requirements and SDGs, we look at green building certifications. We do a compliance method, and whether the client or stakeholders are interested in pursuing the certification, that's up to them. But it's really good to clarify your decarbonization sustainability strategies, how they really map out on all these compliance codes and standards and guidelines. And when you see this, it's really it's a celebration of success stories as the design really develops. We all understand that the graph of information goes accurate as you move towards DD and final stage. But that doesn't mean we need to wait till the end. We can start with minimum information and then update as we move forward, and that would help us clarify what are our priorities and how we're able to meet them. So, interestingly is that the company, and I really like to speak about that because I came all the way from the Middle East to Ottawa, and it's been really great working with amazing subject matter expertise who are leading the leaders themselves. But what is really impressive is that we don't only communicate to clients what they need to do on their projects, but what really needs and what needs to be done at the level of the company itself. And again, I've been active with ASHRAE and AEE for a decade now. So the first three are probably common commitments that most companies have been committed to, which is the AIA commitment, the AIA Material Pledge, and the Structural Engineer Commitment 2050. Now, the latest two, which I'm proud to communicate to you, are the MEP 2040 and the Canada Net Zero Challenge. I'm not going to speak about the language and the requirement and the reporting. I'll leave that to you. But what I'm going to speak about is the proposal. The proposal language, once we read it, and how we're submitting to it. What is really required part of the proposal? Yes, there are lots of proposals and requirements that we are looking at that require commitment to Net Zero Challenge, commitment to MEP 2040, which is interestingly looking at the embodied carbon due to the MEP systems. So now we're going beyond the embodied carbon of the building envelope and communicating in our specifications, embodied carbon coming from refrigerants, coming from ducts, from pipes, from HVAC systems. Now you'll come and tell me, well, we don't have enough information set by the manufacturers, especially that the MEP system has a lot of parts, and sometimes they come from wide ranges from the world. Well, this is when you need to look at methodologies and frameworks like TM65, like the REX new guideline that was lately published, and much more, and narrow down the minimum commitments that you are able to do at the level of your own company, but also at the level of the projects that you're working on. Are you able to look at the refrigerants? Are you able to adjust the language around that? Are you able to look at the material quantity? That's all really important to do. So again, I'll reflect back on a discussion with a client that we had last week. On one of my projects, I'm building a decision-making tool or an optimization tool. And it's quite a large project where you have more than 4 stakeholder groups involved in the decision-making. And I had this one question come up. So you're building us an optimization tool over a project that will be built over a 10-year duration period. Are we able to use the same tool and it would be valuable to us in 10 years with the input that you're giving us today? It was really an interesting question because to stakeholders, it was meant to say that what I'm feeding the input to this tool as a minimum baseline requirement of 90.1, that will remain as is in 10 years. And the same savings will be claimed 10 years from now. So I had to really explain to the team that 90.1 in itself will be net zero by 2031, and that in every 3-year cycle, it's becoming more and more stringent, and that the tool needs to become fed this information so that we're designing better with the years to come. The important thing to see here is that the guidelines that are being offered to us with the factors, with the methodologies, with the frameworks are meant to help us. But really, we cannot stay with the same mindset that what we do today is very helpful and claiming the same amount of savings 10 years from now. We really need to work with what is better, with what could exceed the minimum requirements that we are currently meeting. You've probably all seen the European Standard 15978. This standard has been adopted by ASHRAE, by SIPC and most of guidelines and companies and organizations. Now, this is the language that we communicate on every single project. It could only focus on operational energy. It could only focus on embodied carbon only upfront, which is stage A, and not throughout the whole thing. But our role is really to make sure that this assessment, the whole life carbon assessment, is really introduced very early on and adopted all the way till the end, because only the right decisions could be done if you are looking at the big picture. If you decide to limit your boundary to specific stages, then how can you really compare apple to apple? In the previous presentation, we heard that we want to be able to understand how better we are doing. If you want to understand how better you're doing, we really need to look at the big picture, understand the ins and the outs. Now, I told Hadan that this morning I really want to add new information to you. You've probably seen this, but I'm not sure if you read the new REX guideline. There are 2 new modules that have been added. For stage A, there's a new module called A0. And what does that stand for? A0, it means the emissions that actually come out from decisions on choosing which site, on decisions on what really works for the project, selecting your team, and all. Now, you'll tell me, how is that carbon impactful? I want to tell you that for some time we've been looking at this EN standard, and it has been only operational carbon and embodied carbon. But in reality, we've been missing the user carbon. So the user carbon now is inserted at the A0 stage, and then we have another stage integrated under B, which is the B8. So I'm attending and contributing to the ASHRAE conference upcoming in New York. It's basically focused on embodied carbon from high-rise buildings. So I'm working with a larger team from various organizations, but really, if you come to think about it, if you're in New York, you're in a high-rise residential building, and you think of the transportation and the traffic and the carbon outcome from that, it's really important not to miss that. So this has been really integrated in this new guideline under B8, and that really focuses on the transportation methods and more methods adopted at such types of buildings. Again, this is really very helpful because if you're designing a large campus, a large city, and the location, and urban sprawl, and all really come to place. So every project and site are different, and it's really a journey that I take pride of and I really enjoy. We enjoy such interesting processes at Santec. So one of the interesting things we enjoy is that prior to any project, while understanding the scope and benchmarking and understanding where the market stands, it's really important to be able to have this minimum base case, which is the minimum commitments you're working with. And how are you looking forward? So let's say, for example, the executive order in New York. I'm going back to that because it was the latest client call we had yesterday. It only requires you to report on the material that you're using. Does it have a specific target of the embodied carbon? Not really. So the first question the client asked was, so we don't have to really meet a specific target. We need to just report on the concrete, on the steel, on the various material. Well, yes. However, we know how the market is maturing. We understand the provincial, the region, and the global commitments. I've attended COP28 last year in Dubai. And believe it or not, the commitments from various countries in the world were really, really advanced. I've never seen such funds and such energy being put forward to develop guidelines, sometimes repetitive language. We're reading all these guidelines from various entities, but they're all coming in together to reduce. So we've communicated to the guideline and the client that today we don't have a target, but down the road, A year from now, you will probably have. So why not do it right? It's a new construction, it's a hospital. Things could be done the right way. So my advice to you, if you do have the opportunity to set an embodied carbon target for your projects, do it early on and do it wisely with your client. Those were some of the graphics that we've actually developed with the amazing Santic team that work closely with us. We sketched those things and we have them introduce all this interesting colorful palette. I won't go through it, but this is really to tell you that understanding and being expert of reading existing construction various to new construction is always important. Understanding your source of fossil fuel. So working, for example, on the hospital, the cancer hospital in Dubai, we need to understand the grid, right? So a country that produces fossil fuel while really building a hospital that is iconic in sustainability target. Now, how can you balance that? What are really your main priorities for this project if it's a new construction? So brainstorming these priorities with the client and with all disciplines, whether architecture, mechanical, electrical, are really important, and understanding the sources of fuel that you're working with come in handy when you want to set those targets. This should be a Sankey diagram, but probably because of the lighting, it's not as clear. Why I have this on is basically the only way to map out the energy, again, back to the previous slide, is to set the right baseline, is to know your sources, is to reduce, reuse, and be able to make sure that the first step you're taking, you have an energy efficiency with minimum load while respecting people at forefront. So indoor environmental quality is very important, especially, and that's a metric really that it really reiterates in my mind. Because at this time in time, and I have 2 kids of my own, I ask them in summer, especially when I travel back to the Middle East, to come inside because the temperature goes up to 50 degrees Celsius. Back then, I used to go outside when I was hot inside. So the metric that I'm speaking about is that we spend more than 98% of our time indoors. So I cannot be only speaking to decarbonization or speaking to sustainability. I have to make sure that my language includes the indoor environmental quality and the luxury of people living inside and respecting their health, well-being, and productivity. More on the facility optimization, energy efficiency, thermal storage, demand response. So again, back to the tool and back to all these examples of projects that we're working on. One of the tools that we're currently building really is made to specifically look at the infrastructure that is required for a large city in the middle of the desert and what is needed at every phase of that project. And it's really important because the infrastructure required from a district cooling perspective, from waste, from water. Imagine, and why I'm saying that is that because when I really integrated the waste team on board, how we deal with waste in the US and in Canada is way different from how you deal with waste back in the Middle East. However, interestingly, there's those true certifications and OR certifications. And you might not believe it, but a target of net zero waste for a large city occupied with minimal impact on occupants with a mentality not used to reuse bags or maybe have a specific, day-to-day activities. We were able to target that through feasibility studies and 5 options to avoid waste going to the landfill. Back to the tool, infrastructure is important. Decisions and understanding the culture, the operation, the phases of the project all comes into place. And understanding the thermal storage and demand response with the growth of population in a city or a building or a campus also plays an important role. Alternative energy generation, we have them all on one slide. This is to say that we look into them all and see what works best. You'll tell me this is too much. I'm not trying to sell our services, although they're quite really impressive, but I want to say that what we do try to provide is a priority matrix. What comes in first? Is it cost? Is it maintenance? Is it feasibility? Is it durability? Is it a compliance with a minimum code requirement? What is it exactly? It can be as, as simple as I don't have it available in that area. I don't have people to come in to maintain it if I am to install it on site. So all of these factors are taken into a gap analysis priority chart and mapped out to see what is really important and best suited for our projects. And summarizing our approaches, we build nothing, we build less, we build clever, and we build efficiently all throughout the project stages, and we do it, most importantly, collaboratively between our teams, our disciplines, and with the client teams. Thank you, everyone.
Getting close to the end, sorry. Still transitioning. Okay, briefly, we'll keep going. So some of the challenges of decarbonization that we've observed, and I'll speak more to the existing built environment versus the new built environment. Obviously funding, project financing, that's a major one. Limitations within the facility, especially here in the city of Ottawa, we have a lot of heritage buildings. The challenges around that, what does that look like with heritage envelopes, et cetera. Highly utilized buildings, so oftentimes when you're looking at a massive deep retrofit, you are potentially evacuating that building for a set period of time. So what does that look like when a client only has one building and it's highly utilized? Materials, technologies, space availability. You start looking at technologies like geothermal or geoexchange. You may need a lot of space, so depending on what that looks like, there's all kinds of challenges there, and knowledge gaps. Some of the solutions that we've been looking at, so from the financing side, there are grants available, and we'll speak about that here in a moment. But other aspects, so bringing in a team of specialists that can support from a diverse background, that's really important. We find that there's really innovative solutions that can come into play, not just looking at one group of solutions. I do a lot of work within the district energy realm and what that might look like to decarbonize large groupings of buildings all at once. A lot of campuses, et cetera, have that type of system. And there's a lot of thought around the potential of adding new technology that we don't even know exists yet. 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, there's going to be tech that comes out that is going to be mind-blowing to us that we're not even realizing yet that is commercially available, or perhaps it's not in North America yet. So having the availability to incorporate systems like that at scale, I think, is a really important solution to consider, especially in those campus scenarios. When it comes to, and this is what I was speaking about, I guess within Stantec we're a global company, but at the end of the day, the work that we do to decarbonize and the ideas and solutions that we come up with really need to be from the expertise that is learned throughout the world. And so leveraging individuals, the capabilities, the wisdom that they can bring, no matter where they might look, a lot has changed in the last number of years that allow for virtual collaboration in a much more meaningful way. And so really maximizing and enhancing that so that projects can be best put forward as a collaborative method. So some of the benefits, just very quickly, obviously greenhouse gas emissions through decarbonization, energy efficiency, so a lot of those were the key metrics that really started this pathway. But as Gina was mentioning, resiliency within buildings is so important these days, having that bigger picture outlook. And then now, I think more than ever, indoor environment and air quality is really becoming a hot topic that we're seeing around the world. A lot of work has been done to try and make a strong envelope, but there's a lot of misunderstanding still around that, and so then you end up with challenges within buildings. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the coming years on how to maintain indoor environment and air quality. This is just a really cool slide that speaks to the different pathways and kind of where things are projected to go. So pre-Paris, where our current policies lie, where some of the pledges, like Gina was mentioning at COP, and then the 1.5 degree commitment and what that kind of looks like up till 2100. A little bit on funding. So within Stantec, we have a whole funding team that looks at a number of the different funds that exist. You know, it is an unprecedented time where there is a number of funds that are available that the government is using to incentivize decarbonization. So some of the key ones that our team looks at is Net Zero Accelerator Program, the Clean Growth Fund, and the Low Carbon Economy Fund. Those, I think, are the main ones within buildings, especially here in Ontario. When it comes to the funding process and kind of the lessons that we've learned, and I was kind of talking to a few people earlier on today as well, you know, submitting for a grant or fund application the day before it's due with very little thought process is really not an effective way of going after funding like this. It really does take a planned effort and a group effort, bringing in the right people to support an application so that it can have the highest potential of success. And as we also heard at the beginning, having the patience in step 3 to wait for that funding to be pulled through and available to the successful applicants is also a key thing, because some of these fund applications, they do take a bit of time for the funding to actually come through. And then actually managing that fund well through the project. So however the funds will be used, managing that. So it's not, you know, the goal is not just to get the funding, but to actually complete the assignment that is tied to that funding. This kind of spoke to what I just mentioned, a holistic pitch, yeah. A couple of quick success stories that we have. So Evolve One, this is a project here in Ontario, Waterloo. It was the first CAGBC zero carbon building certification. It was positive energy, so it had geothermal or geoexchange plus solar, very tight envelope, really interesting building. The client was really motivated to have a building that could be net positive and prove the business case around building a building like this. This happens to be the University of Windsor, but we're working with campuses across North America, just looking at how to decarbonize buildings at a larger scale, right? So looking at a campus, 100 buildings, what can that look like? Like I said, a lot of these systems have district energy systems already in place. Can they be utilized? Can they be modified to support a global decarbonization of 100 buildings at a time? Things that we're noticing that are kind of typical topics that come up is having strong metering and understanding of where energy goes. So energy management is a key thing. Looking at retro commissioning to try and understand, okay, can improvements be made? And then of course things like envelope and where your energy is, how your energy is generated. This is a new construction project. It's a visitor center. It's in a very northern remote area. Well, it's in Winnipeg, but it's very cold, colder than Ottawa. And it is, it's at the construction stage right now, but it's been passive design certified already. So really interesting project, capable of working in cold climates, so very unique project. And then we had the Stantec Tower in there, just being a very high-rise building, the tallest tower in the Western Hemisphere within Canada, and just some of the interesting aspects of that. There's a lot of interest in what's happening in the downtown area with different district systems as well, and how to best utilize the energy there, just knowing the limitations within Alberta. Gina, do you want to read? Okay, this is a quote from Gina, but I get to read it. It's the last slide too. So as humans, our role on Earth is undeniably powerful. All we need to do is realize the potential and cultivate the capability to make a difference. So thank you. Gina, do you want to come up for questions soon? Any questions? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
When you're analyzing like for net zero and total life cycle climate performance type stuff, do they take into account maybe the building is 100% on electrical, but where the electrical is coming from, like if you have OPG, like the Lennox generating station running on oil, natural gas, you're still utilizing carbon,
100%.
even though the energy source. So, and it's not putting any of this down. It's just wondering, is that being accounted for?
Yeah, maybe I'll speak to that, but absolutely. So we do look at the grid. You know, the projects in Ontario that we've looked at, because of the electrification that's occurring, it actually is looking like that the grid will be getting a bit dirtier versus cleaner sooner than later. Of course, they're going to try and turn that around with introducing more green technology towards the grid, but that's what it's looking at. So we do take that into account as part of this. Absolutely. Go ahead.
One thing to add is that changes or retrofits or major changes do not have to all be immediately upfront. What we tend to do with these types of clients is to have a pathway, targets, and recommendations with costs, with return on investments, so that the client is not really back out when they see a large amount of costs really upfront. So the pathway study and interim targets throughout the ultimate goal of 2030, 2035, or 2050 is always a key to loosen up the cost, but also to meet and claim those targets on the emissions.
Any other questions? Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.